It's for real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nostalgia Crackdown here on the Let's Get Ready Network. I'm Adelia, that's my buddy Josh, and this time we're here to talk about the best Schmoedown Babyfaces.
Yep.
Josh, talk a little bit about why Schmoedown Babyfaces were so important.
Absolutely. When we think about like character work within the Schmoedown, the first thing that always comes to mind is heel work because it's more obvious. You're trying to be unlikable. The Andrew guys, the Chandrus, those are the two names that comes up. Even the John Roca at times because it's very in your face. It's very obvious. People love to love the villain in a lot of ways. However, we don't think about character work as much when it comes to baby faces. So why I wanted our first episode on character, that is our first character driven episode, I want to appreciate the baby faces because a lot of their work is very underappreciated. It's not noticed because it's not as flashy. It's not as shown in your face. It's trying to get you to be likable, which in some ways could be even harder because it's not the easiest to be likable at times. I mean, you could try and be a nice guy. Like Chandru tried to be a baby face and couldn't do it. That was the one character he could not play.
That's true.
Chandru failed at being a baby face, and that's why they turned him heel. So not everyone can do the baby face route. And I think those good baby faces make the Schmoedown great because you want to have a team to root for. For example, I'm a Knicks fan. So the playoffs are much more exciting for me because the Knicks are in it and I have some team to root for. If you have no one to root for, if the league is full of villains and unlikable people and you don't have anyone to root for, who cares if you win? No matter who wins, you always lose. But if you have someone you're rooting for in the end, rooting for specifically because they're so likable, that gives investment into the games and into the matches.
I totally agree, Josh. And let's start with some of the so-called bigger name babyfaces, those that had a whole lot of success in the Schmoedown. And one of the first ones is the very first Schmoedown singles champion, Mark Riley.
I think Riley, if we talk about Mark Riley, he's one of the most important players in Schmoedown history just for the development of the league. Because even being so knowledgeable and even being like the first major champion and being the first guy who seemed unbeatable at the beginning, he still was very likable. You could never really root against him. And just to show the Mark Riley's babyface-ness, if you will, you got to remember, and once he got teamed up with Ben Bateman and Tom Dagnino, two of maybe the biggest heels at the time, it would be very easy to be like, well, these two are the biggest heels at the time. We got to make Riley heel. But instead, they went the opposite. But Riley was such a good babyface. He made Bateman and Dagnino turn babyface with him rather than the opposite, which I think it just shows how likable. It's why Who's the Boss was never an unlikable team. It's very tough to dislike Riley, but he's still very cool. He's still competitive. It's not like he's a pushover. There's just a lot of likable moments about him. And I will say the fact that Dagnino and Bateman turn face rather than Riley turns heel does say a lot about Riley's likableness and his power and his sway within the league.
I agree. Mark Riley's one of my favorite players. He was always so much fun to watch. And I really enjoyed the contrast of his pairing with Bateman because you're right, Bateman was such a great heel, and that just showed to me all the great aspects of Mark Riley as someone who wasn't a heel. And he was phenomenal. I think that the Schmoedown wouldn't be as much of a success as it was without Mark Riley as like that first champion to sort of carry it over, and then to be the first. He was the first two-time champion as well, right?
I believe.
Because I think it went from.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
Okay.
Like the first time two singles champion. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to think if teams counted, like if someone got like two
No,
times
no, no, no. I'm
champion.
just talking singles champion.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Another fantastic babyface named Mark was Mark Ellis. Baby carrots on the, whether it was in a match or on the desk, always made me laugh and smile, and that was one of the great hallmarks of him as a babyface. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, when you dress up as Santa Claus, you got to be likable. You got to be
Yeah.
likable to pull that off. And Ellis was always likable. He was so easy to root for. He also, I would say, his background as a comedian just makes it work because he's so smooth. He's so funny on the desk and in matches. And it's interesting because if you think about Ellis, he was basically the referee of the Schmoedown in a lot of ways. Most of the matches he announced, he was the one delivering rulings, explaining them. In a lot of the ways, in sports, the referee is the most hated character in sports. In most sports, somehow Ellis was able to be likable despite being the referee, which I think is fascinating. When Andrew Guy turned face and wanted to become an announcer, who did he go to? He went to Ellis immediately for that reason. Ellis is the I think there's an interesting thing about is it possible to be a heel commentator? I think there's a lot of reasons why we haven't seen a lot of that and why most commentators were face. And that's why I think when Guy went to Ellis, he knew he couldn't do as much edge in his he needed to go to the best. He needed to go to the person who was the most likable at the desk, the person who truly in a lot of ways just could never stay mad at no matter what. And no matter if you went after him, it would always bounce right off him. It's just, man, when we talk about this episode, it's almost tough to describe because how do you just say, yeah, they're likable and so many times? Because yeah, Ellis was just likable. He was funny, he was enjoyable, he was entertaining, and he brought a lot of character both to his in commentary to and the matches he played.
Absolutely. Another person that I think is one of the best baby faces the Shmona never saw was a machine, Janine. She never quite got that championship belt, and I don't feel like she necessarily ever completely got her due for as good as she was as a competitor. But she was always there. Her costumes were great. She was just incredibly, incredibly likable. One of my favorite people in the Schmoedown. What about you?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember I think maybe one of the most heartbreaking matches I've ever seen with the Schmoedown is her versus Marisol. To see her miss
Yeah,
that last question because we're all pulling for her and it's such an important match. And just to see her miss that question, it just breaks everyone's hearts. She was always just I remember they tried to set her up a bit heelish at the beginning, again with Jay. I remember when she first came into the league. But
hmm,
what we'll also notice about great baby faces, which is similar to great heels, even if you try to start them off a certain way, their natural talents will show out and they'll go towards what they are better at. And Janine was always better at being likable. She was always better at getting the crowd to be with her rather than against her. And what really I think one of Janine's greatest strengths is we knew how much she put into the game. We knew how much she put into the costumes, how much she loved the game, and how much she was willing to do the story aspect, the costume aspect, and how much work she put in improving her game. And we would always want that work to be rewarded. After all, if you want to put hard work into something, you always want to have hard work be rewarded rather than someone who doesn't try at all and get rewarded that way. So Janine was always super easy to root for just because of that. And that didn't change no matter what faction she was on, who she was playing against. It was I can't imagine many times where I rooted against the machine, which is a testament to her character.
absolutely. Another group that I always found myself rooting for constantly, whether they were playing singles matches or together, is the Shire Wolves. Clark Wolf, Rachel Cushing. Let's start with Clark. Um, I was so happy when she was the one that teamed up with Rachel. after the whole breakup of the Nerds Watch, because um, I loved Clark as part of Wolves of Steel with Riley, and I wanted her to have another strong teams run and finally get that belt. And I knew she was finally going to probably get that belt once they teamed up together. She was always 100% likable to me from the beginning of her appearing in the Schmoedown once I started watching, and I just loved everything about Clark. And we'll get to Rachel in a minute, but what about Clark?
I completely agree. I think that you said a lot of what I wanted to say. And when she teamed up with Rachel, I was like, oh, this totally makes sense. This is a team that's going to win the title. But this is two competitors that were very good, but never crossed the line to winning that belt. And once they teamed up, I'm like, oh, okay, they're going to get the belt. These are two great competitors that are going to be finally great get a belt. When in sports, sometimes it's kind of unfair where you see these great players like a Charles Barkley or right now Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic,
Mm-hmm.
all fantastic, fantastic players, and they don't have a belt. So that's always going to be against them in history. And until they get that belt, we're always going to say, yeah, he's great, but is he really top 15 if he doesn't have a belt or something to that effect? And Clark
Yeah.
came out swinging rookie of the year. But what I loved about Clark in a lot of ways was her intensity within the matches. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I do have a cold, so that's why the coughing is happening. I can feel one coming up. But Clark, but Clark's intensity within the matches, her competitiveness, you could feel it even off the screen. At home, despite you not being there, you could feel her intensity, her commitment, her
Yeah.
love for the game, but also her desire to win. And I always like those types of players, and I think that is the best type of baby faces. You want the player to be invested in winning, therefore you are invested in winning. Because if the player isn't invested in winning, why should you care? The player doesn't care. You always felt that care of Clark, and you always felt that intensity and investment. And that's why you could just see the pain on her face when she was playing Ethan Irwin and she made the South Side by Me mistake.
Oh God, that's the moment maybe in all of Schmoedown history that hurts me the most.
It's one of the few moments, and this might be another episode where if you could change one thing in one match ever, you had the power to just switch one thing in history. Switching maybe Southside with me with Clark Wolf is absolutely up there for that moment, just because of how painful it is, and especially considering who she was playing against, Ethan Irwin. At that point, Ethan Irwin looked basically unbeatable. The only person who beat him was Mark Draco off of just a lucky 5-pointer, basically. And that's not to take away from Indreko's win, but that's just to show how unbeatable Irwin looked like at that moment. He seemed like he was unstoppable, and you had to get almost everything go right, and everything. Clark was just playing at the top of her game, and it just to lose that way, it just that also I feel like those moments make a better baby face. Having that happen to her, even though it is painful and it cost her a chance at a title, that makes her a better baby face because fans go on to that moment and they love that moment and they're like, okay, now that that happened to them, I'm going to root for them even more because of that was so painful for me too.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about Rachel. Rachel's character work I always felt was very understated, and she didn't get the appreciation for what she did as a character as much as she should have. But I thought her stuff, especially when it was the storyline of the breakup of the Nerds Watch and Ken joining the Lions Den and all of that, I thought Rachel was phenomenal in that. And I was happy to see her come through that and then team up with Clark and become the champion that I think we all knew Rachel could be. And I love Rachel. She's one of my favorite players ever and just so likable.
Absolutely. I mean, the break that match where she had to play 2 versus 1 against
And almost
Draco, and
beat them.
it almost beat them, but you could just feel the pain on her face about the betrayal. You can
Yeah.
see that, and that's one of the maybe most babyface versus heel moments in Schmoedown history. It's one of the most memorable moments, and just the true level of her knowledge was always showcased. And she wasn't maybe the most natural character, and she wasn't someone who wasn't always actively doing character work, but there was almost like something that made us appreciate how good she was despite that and how she was trying and maybe putting herself out of her comfort zone for someone who um, doesn't always want to go outside or be in social environments. And for myself, I'm saying, and to see Rachel maybe do something that's a bit out of her comfort zone because she's just such a badass in movie trivia and is able to not only kill the trivia part, but also do above, I would say mostly above average, either above average to absolutely fantastic in the character department. I don't know if I would have like joined LGR if it wasn't for seeing Rachel push herself in that way, and I would all and really shine. I think you could make the argument she's the most inspiring and the most powerful character within the Schmoedown, just because of definitely inspiring, I would say, but she's just a fascinating character to dive into, and she really has done an absolutely fantastic job.
I agree with that. I think Rachel is incredibly inspiring. She's one of the reasons why I got on camera eventually. Like, I do remember having conversations with myself, being like, well, if Rachel can do the Schmoedown, I can do this little movie review or whatever it was we were doing. So, yeah, love Rachel. And another badass female babyface that I loved was Mara Knopic. Mara came in and just sort of took the inner geekdom division by storm. And she was just sarcastic and funny and just incredibly likable. I loved her calling herself the Brown Dwarf Star. And I just love Mara Knopic. What about you?
I mean, the Brown Dwarf Star line is iconic. It's something
Yeah.
that, like, minute you say it, you're like, oh, you are already a character. You're already doing this perfectly, and this is we didn't put Video Drew on this list because I don't think you can call her a face or a heel, but Mara does have some of that Video Drewness where it's just a bit odd in some ways, and that I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I'm saying that as a good thing. It's not the norm. It's not you always get something new with Mar and something interesting and something witty and something fun. And that's why I love watching her matches. And that tournament run when she was going against I guess heel in the league at the moment with Mike Kalinowski, and to see her just, get a match and just her the fans you just saw after her first match. It only took one match and they instantly fell in love with her. They instantly
Yep.
all wanted to follow her, and it was she the minute you saw that first match and you saw her, it's like, oh, she's a superstar. She is. If she, we'll see if she can win a title, and she ended up not only winning a title but becoming one of the greatest intergeekdom players of all time. But to watch her development and to see her return even after a long period of retirement, and after that long period of retirement, win the belt, just
Yeah.
a very fun, great, and just very likable character.
Phenomenal. Loved Mara. Another couple of people that I absolutely loved um, started out on a heel faction and were heels, but it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that everybody just loved them, and that's Marisol McKee and Adam Collins. Um,
Absolutely.
Corruption, deception, that whole team leading into Marisol's title run and Adam's title run, and just the way that the whole community embraced them as a team and as individual players. I love these two players so much. They're phenomenal people, they're phenomenal competitors, and I loved their character work as well.
Absolutely. I Marisol was so good. She could never be a heel. Just never. She was in a heel faction. She was set up to succeed as a heel, and they definitely were trying to play that whole evil justice type of thing with her, and that just couldn't work. It just couldn't work with her. She was just too badass and too good at being a face. Like there was just no way. I think you could really make her a great heel, and that's just what it shows. Some the best baby faces will always just kind of shine as baby faces, and there's very few characters that can play both baby face and heel. And I truly believe that Marisol. I would say Marisol McKee turned corruption face, and
Yeah.
again, not only the Riley. Go back to what I said about Riley to have the power to turn corruption out of all things. The name is called corruption, and to turn that whole entire faction face is absolutely incredible. And I is an even bigger achievement than the Riley turning Danino and Bateman face. I think that alone just shows you how great of a face and how likable and how much the fans loved Marisol McKee. And Adam Collins, I think a lot of Collins's run was because he was the 16 seed. He
Yeah.
was in the play-in to play John Roca in the big tournament where there was like 64 people, I believe, where it was like a huge tournament. He was in the play-in to play John Roca. He was the 16 seed, and he went all the way to the end and won the title from that tournament. It's tough to root against a story like that. It's tough to root against a 16 seed. And I think Collins really shined after that tournament and after the because I think unlike Marisol, I don't think his character got off to a good start. I think it was fine. I think I understand what they were going for, and I don't think it was as bad as people were saying at the beginning, truly, but and he was trying a lot of stuff, but I think his character only really shined when he went to swag, but also when corruption went face. I think that's when his character shined the most compared to his initial run. And you actually I appreciate about Collins is you see the journey. You see him going getting better as a character.
Mhm.
I'll make a quick reference. I love JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and part of the reason I love it is because you watch the creator of that story get better at storytelling as every single part comes together. And with Collins, it's the same thing. After every match, he gets a bit better at his character and a bit better at character work and a bit to the point where he's a really, really good face.
I agree with that. Loved those two so much. Another team that I loved, well, faction that I loved really, was the Quirky Mercs.
Before we get to the Mercs, I do have to. I think we
Okay.
have to. There's one last big name we have to say, and I know this. The reason why I say this, and because it's one of the fans' best and most beloved teams. It's a team we both agree. If we were doing a list ranking of best faces, we wouldn't even put this team on the consideration. However, it would be. I think we have to mention them, and that's the Wildberries. We
Yeah,
do have to
the
mention the
Wildberries.
Wildberries. No team captured the fans' heart like the Wildberries. When it shows you something where what made Shannon Barney one of the greatest heels of all time is breaking up the Wildberries. That
Hmm.
is what made her. That is one of the most memorable moments of the draft and of her career as a heel. And I'll be honest, I never got the wild berries. I never got them. I never liked them. I never rooted for them. I kind of don't understand why they were so beloved. It could partially because they just didn't hit my sense of humor, and like I always thought they were loud and annoying. And this might be slander, and I might lose all my Schmoedown cred for saying this. I just never got it. But despite this, we when we talk about the best baby faces of all time, we can't not mention the Wild Berries because maybe they had the most committed fans, and also they are maybe the most beloved team of all time.
Yeah, the Wildberries deserve their credit for that. Um, I am not the biggest fan of the Wildberries. I love Josh McCouga. I think Elliot Dewberry is funny. Them together with the coming in and chugging Fireball and all of that, I just didn't get it. I'll admit that. I just didn't get it. But you're right. They were beloved by the fans. And when the team came back together, that was a big moment at Spectacular. So, yeah, the Wildberries good to be on this list. But the Quirky Mercs, perhaps the most face faction of all the factions, led by Koi Jondro. Um, Talk a little bit about the Quirky Mercs, Josh.
The Quirky Mercs, you couldn't be heel on the Quirky Mercs. You were too. The Mercs just had such a likable, fun feel. And again, what I think what's important about the Mercs is it wasn't like they didn't care about winning. They cared about winning. When you talk, if you look at Cohen, all his Shazam championship matches, you could see the competitive fire in him. They cared
Oh
about
yeah.
winning, but despite that, they were just happy to be there. and they were happy to win or loss, and they were just enjoying. When you see someone else having fun, it makes you want to have fun, and that's what Coy Jandreau did. His vibe and his energy and his also competitiveness at some point just made everyone feel like they were having a good time and that the stakes weren't as big despite it being big. It always felt like, well, no matter what, they're still the Mercs and they're still fun. And I actually think Coy Jandreau got. I think there were a couple of Face of the Year awards that should have gone to Coy Jandreau. I think if you talk about like maybe the greatest heels of all time, if you were to rank them, I think John Drew would either be 1 or 2 or 3. He would definitely be my top 3. I think John Drew doesn't get enough credit for being one of the greatest baby faces of all time. I think Shannon gets credit for being one of the best heels of all time. Danilo does when he was with the Lions Den and stuff like that. And I think John Drew should absolutely be in the conversation, or maybe be the greatest baby face of all time. That's another discussion. We're not doing this by any order, obviously, but I do think John Drew was so extremely good at creating an environment that made the fans and his competitors just thrive and have fun.
Absolutely. And two of his competitors that had the most success were, of course, William Bibiani and Brendan Meyer, Shazam. They won a ton of matches under Coy's guidance and were two of the just most beloved, fun, likable characters the Schmoedown ever saw.
Absolutely. I mean, Bibbs started another person, which people forget. He started off as a heel on the Horsemen. He started
Yep.
off as a heel, and they continued to, even when he left the Horsemen, they tried to continue him being heel with like Ricky Hayberg, I
Whitney,
believe his name was,
Whitney, and Ricky Hayberg. Yeah.
and like I don't know, I forget what Bibbs' exact words on it, but it's just clear it wasn't working him as a heel. And then once he turned face, it's like, oh yeah, because he's definitely got the type of like charisma and like that just works better as a face. And there's a lot of likable moments in, especially on his run to get the championship and become one of the greatest teams players of all time. And his knowledge always shined through. There was always a respect for his knowledge. You could like, in part of the baby faces is you respect them, is you respect their knowledge or their performance or something like that. And with Bibbs, you just respected how much he knew, how much of a beast he was when it came to movie trivia.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when he got paired up with Brendan, it just brought out a fun and playful side, which Bibbs always tried to have with the entrances and everything when he was paired up with Whitney and all of that. But just them paired up and wearing the Shazam shirts and just having fun. You could tell they were just having fun, but they were taking it seriously. And they just were one of the most likable teams we've ever seen.
Absolutely. And that moment came from the free for all. And talk about like moments making baby faces. I think that
Oh, yeah.
moment of Bibbs standing the entire free for all, being the first person called out and standing the entire one, in my opinion, like after that moment, he had to become the greatest baby face of all time, because like at that moment, almost everyone is rooting for you in that moment and probably root for you afterwards just because you showed that wealth of knowledge. And that
Yep.
moment also created the team of Shazam. And that's a turning point for Brendan Meyer's career in a lot of ways, because who knows if he gets paired up with, he doesn't get paired up with Bibbs in that moment. Because if that doesn't happen, he doesn't get paired up with Bibbs. That moment is the reason why he got paired up with Bibbs.
Yeah.
And after that free for all, he also became very likable for showing, oh, this kid knows his stuff. And he was very likable. And he was very good in that match against Paulo Yama despite losing. And what both Bibbs and Meyer, but especially Meyer, helped was not only the respect for their knowledge, but respect for the game. And
Yes.
like players that had respect for the game just made them even better baby faces. And I think there's no two better people we can say about that for Bibbs and Brendan Meyer. I think both of them truly showed what it was like to have respect for the game and the respect for the rules and the competitiveness. And I'll also quickly say, when you're the kid it's hard to be a heel kid. It's hard for people to
Yes.
be a villain as a kid because
Yes.
it's like, well, when you have the monocle of the kid, there's not a lot of villainous kids we take seriously. It's very hard to do. And a lot of people wanted Meyer to go heel at some point. My take was with Meyer, you can never make him heel. It's never going to work. Or even if you do it, you have to do a bunch of stuff, a bunch of like hard work and have everything go right. And it's just like, why would you want to do that when you could just have him be a baby face forever? It takes no work and it always works. It's like a cheat button. Why would you take the hard route when you have the cheat button? Just use the cheat button. And Brendan Meyer was the cheat button when it came to baby faces. He truly was. It's like you want to put someone likable who they're going to root for, and you want to put him against this heel to put the heel up. You just have Brendan Meyer face them. And Meyer was it, I think if you were to do a poll of greatest baby faces of all time, I think Meyer would win that poll. I'm not sure if I would vote Meyer, but I think if you polled the vast majority of Schmoedown about who's the greatest baby face of all time, I think Meyer wins that poll. I think, which shows how great he is.
I agree with that. You brought up the free for all making baby faces, and another person who kind of was made in the free for all was one half the Real Rejects, John Humphrey. Him and Greg Alba are, I'll admit it, they're my boys, they're my friends, but they were so much fun constantly. And when they got under Coy's tutelage, they took the game a little more seriously, and it paid off. They got some wins that I think a lot of people didn't expect them to get.
Absolutely. It's hard to lose and still be likable, and to lose that many times and still be likable because it's at a
Yeah.
certain point you're still getting matches and it doesn't feel like you're trying. And why are you losing? And I'll be honest, at some points that did get to me. I'm I, the problem I had with the rejects at times is like it didn't feel like they had respect for the game, especially early on in their career. I feel like I think there was a moment where they got spinner's choice and had their opponent choose or something, or they had
They got
or
opponent, their opponents got opponent's choice, and they told their opponents to choose the category.
yeah,
That's what it was.
that moment is for some people will make you the greatest baby face for being like, oh, we're all having fun. You go ahead and choose your category. But for people like me, it's like that we want people to try and win and have respect for the game. And for that moment, that was very tough for me. I'm going to be honest. The ever root for the rejects after doing that. That's a moment where I'm like, that doesn't feel like you have respect for the game or respect for winning. But after they got under Coy's tutelage, it did. You definitely feel like okay, now they do care about the game. They are trying and they do understand it. And I think they had some of the greatest entrances. For that Greg Alba free for all entrance is absolutely incredible, and they're a
The Star
fascinating
is
team.
Born one, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think they are a fascinating team to break down, and they're always so likable. It's tough to root against them, but I think they're definitely a fascinating case when you look at them, just because any other team would not with their record. It's impressive that they got their record just because they got that many matches. Because usually, what happens if you go like 1-2 or 2-4, you just don't get any more matches. If you have
Yeah.
that singles record or that team's record, you get broken up or you just don't get those matches. With the Real Rejects, they were able to continuously incentivize Christian to give them matches despite constantly losing and having the fans constantly doubt them. But despite that, it was always a good time, and they were always a good team to just show. And I think one of the turning point moments for that is the Greg Alba match against Kalinowski, because
Yep.
that's one of the moments where it's like, okay, you took the game seriously. You took one of the greatest, maybe the greatest IG competitor of all time. I wouldn't want to say maybe he is the greatest IG competitor of all time, and you took him to the wire. You played a great match, and there's a lot of respect. Mike Kanowski was a heel in the moment at that point in time, and even he was like, "Listen, I respect Greg Alba. I respect you put the work in the game, and you gave me a good match. I respect you." And some of the best baby faces have that moment where even heels can't hate them. Like, there's not a lot of heels who hate the wild berries, even though if I don't get them. And that's the same with the rejects. It's very tough to hate the real rejects, even if you are a heel.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about Winston Marshall and Swag.
Yeah, so I don't think Winston Marshall is a babyface, especially because of him managing Chandru. But what was so interesting about Winston is even though I don't think he is a babyface, I think he almost made all his competitors into babyfaces. And while Mercs was the like iconic babyface faction, Swag got a lot of people invested, and there's a vibe around Swag that helped all its competitors. I think the main one is Liz Shannon Miller, who was also, by the way, on the Mercs. Like when the vibe that Winston created for all his competitors, it made them better characters because of Winston was almost the greatest path. Like I'm going to make a reference. He's basically a great passer in the NBA. He always sets his teammates up for a great dunk, basically. And Winston would always just make the character work just a tiny bit easier for his competitors, whether you were really good at it or whether it didn't come naturally to you. No matter what type of competitor you are, Winston would always add to it. Winston would always make it easier to be likable, have a better environment. And honestly, he also helped Chandru be less likable in moments or like be a better heel. And the same is true for baby faces. People on Swag, there was just a coolness about Swag as a faction and about the competitors within the faction, and it really was. I'm trying the best way to describe this, but it really felt like there was a character advantage if you were on Swag. You no matter if you were a babyface or a heel, but it was mostly baby faces. You just had a leg up on other competitors at the character work side just because you had Winston Marshall in your corner, just making it so much easier to either be a babyface or a heel.
I'd agree with that. And one of the great teams that Winston had on Swag was Lon Harris and Paul Oyama. Um, Talk a little bit about both of them as baby faces because Oyama wasn't a baby face before he became a member of Swag, and then he became one of my most liked characters on the show.
So there's two things about that. First, let's start with Lon Harris because I think when we say about competitors who weren't couldn't do heel, Lon is not one of those people. He started out as a heel with the professor, and that was a great character. And then he went to the swag and became a great baby face. I think what's so interesting about Lon is he's just so naturally entertaining and funny, and his characters were so outlandish at some points. It just made you root for them. Like the I forget the name he had when he was with Swag.
Hmm.
Uh,
The delinquent.
Delinquent. That's what it was. The delinquent. But the delinquent was. It's a very out there character. It's like, oh, I'm in some guy's house and the dog is the owner, and like, but despite that, it was just so likable and so funny. And what was also good about Lon is he never ran a bit on for too much. Like the professor was a bit, and then the bit ended at the perfect time. And the delinquent was a bit. And I would argue the delinquent did end. The bit did end at a good time once reboot season happened in the last season of the Schmoedown. And I truly think that Lon is just so naturally funny. It's tough for like either way, no matter what he does, he's going to be successful. But he's one of the greatest characters of all time, especially with the delinquent. It was tough to do character work within the COVID era of the Schmoedown, and you can
Mm-hmm.
make the argument that was the golden era of Lon's character, or the golden era of Lon as character work, basically when Lon was doing character work. I truly believe, especially because it also fit the time, like for COVID, and have the delinquent be this kind of like messy hobo type of thing that it kind of almost fit, and I think that worked with the time period as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Lon as a character is fascinating in a lot of ways, and you can maybe argue he's one of the most natural characters of all time, and he just worked. And it never seemed like he truly cared about the rules of the game in some ways, and I would take that at some points away with him. But just as a character and how natural he is, like you could argue he's one of the greatest characters Schmoedown history, basically, whether heel or babyface or both. He's just so a naturally fantastic performer.
I'd agree with that. I loved Lon's character both as the professor and the delinquent, and it showed two different sides of what he was able to do, and I thought it was great. And I thought pairing him up with someone like Paul Oyama, who was coming off this run as a heel, and now he's a babyface on Swag, I thought was just it worked fabulously.
It's a fascinating turn because not only was Oyama a heel, but at the time there was an argument that he was getting like go away heat as a heel. That he wasn't actually a good heel. He was just a heel that was getting hate because he was doing his character bad or he was just unlikable, and it was like the wrong type of heat. People would argue, and there was even talk of like behind the scenes stuff about Oyama. You know, I remember the Jen Sturger thing. I don't know when that came out about um even Stur. I'm trying to remember the moment, but my brain is messed up with the sickness, so I apologize. I'm not as sharp as I normally am, so I'm not remembering it as well. But what I'm saying is Oyama was coming into Swag with a lot of weird energy, I would argue, because he definitely was hated as a heel, but for some people it was for the wrong reasons. And then he
Mm-hmm.
came on the Swag, and he was so naturally good at being a babyface. I'm like, why even start out as a heel? He was so impressive in my opinion as a babyface. It always felt natural. It always felt smooth, and the respect for the game shined through. And that's what made him a great babyface. Is that it's like, oh man, this kid is a powerhouse. He's a behemoth, but he respects the game. He puts the time in, and he's just smooth. I think smooth is the best way to describe it, especially on Swag. There's just this there's just a natural aspect of it. Everything felt natural, and uh, even though he was putting a lot of effort in, it didn't feel like he was putting effort in.
I agree with that, and then I think smooth is a great way to describe as well Amaru Moses. He wasn't on Swag very long, only in the reboot season, but he was just a likable, fun guy to watch in Inner Geekdom. I loved his team up in reboot season with Clee Wiggins. Amaru knew his stuff. You could tell he knew his stuff, and he is one of my favorite additions from that 20 what it was 2021 draft. Yeah, 2021 draft. So Amaru on Swag was great.
Absolutely, and like what again talking about big moments making a baby face. There was a lot of moments in his first run that, in my opinion, made him a great baby face. But I think obviously the big one is him playing against Mike Kalinowski and him just like giving the champ all he can handle. The
Yeah.
fact that he played so well in that match and he was so impressive in that match, I think is like it's tough to ever root against Amaru just on how good of a showing he gave Mike Kalinowski and how close he was, and then the question just didn't fall his way in the end. Like there's just a respect factor that just will always follow Amaru of like, man, that guy's one of the greats. Even if he never wins the belt, you could always be like, man, he at least knows his stuff because he gave the greatest IG player of all time a run for his money.
Yeah. Someone else who I think knows their stuff and had a great run while she was on Swag was Jen Kemp. And I think she's a little underappreciated for her ability to compete and her trivia knowledge. But Jen Kemp to me stands out as one of the bigger baby faces that was on Swag.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, she was just very likable, and I think her promo, like, I think she was. We haven't talked about promos as much, but I think her promos were very good and very creative.
Yes.
Like, even though she wasn't in a lot of high stakes matches, she was always just likable and enjoyable and a fun time. And it shows that like you don't have to be in like every a title match because the title match does help. Bigger moments lead to more people remembering or like that have more stick with you in some sense. There's probably a better way to describe that, but she showed that she was able to, despite not having as many matches or not be given as much screen time, she can make the most of it and be memorable in her own way and a great baby face.
Absolutely. Um, and underappreciated baby faces are some people that we wanted to talk about as well, starting with Joseph Scrimshaw, who I think was a fantastic Star Wars player, even if he never held that belt. And he just was always funny and witty and just a very, very likable character.
Talking about best baby faces of all time, and this is going to be a hot take. I think Scrimshaw would be in the top 3 of my greatest baby faces of all time. Every match, he was so smooth and so relaxed, but also it really felt like you were watching a Jedi based on how he spoke and how comfortable he was with each result and the answers, and just like even the post and pre-match interviews. There was just a nice, I think the best way to describe it was a vibe with him. But there's a nice vibe and a nice nice dialect based on the way he spoke, that just made him feel like a Jedi. And I think like there's a philosophy to his gameplay that I appreciated, and to the way he viewed the game, which I appreciated and found fascinating, and wished, I wish he's one of the players where I'm like, man, I wish he got a belt, or I wish he got maybe a bit more lucky in some matches. But he's one of those players that's like obviously super knowledgeable, obviously knows his stuff, but also had a clear character, which was just Jedi. He's a Jedi. He has the mindset of a Jedi. He's kind of like go with the flow type of guy, and he was just what you always knew you were going to have a good match and a good time with a Scrimshaw match.
Absolutely. Another underappreciated babyface that I always enjoyed watching was Alonso Duralde. He never quite had the success of some of the other people in the Schmoedown, but I always enjoyed his, how Christmas kind of became his persona by the end of it. I think his nickname was Mr. Christmas. And just, I loved Alonso Duralde. What about you?
I mean, what's more likable than Christmas? I mean,
Yeah.
there's very few things more likable than Christmas. And Duralde is like an interesting competitor because he's so clearly knowledgeable, and like he's got like two of the most underrated likable teams with like Paddington 2 and Deep 13, I believe it was. Like
Hmm.
with both those teams were extremely knowledgeable, extremely fun, has some very memorable matches, and like should have gone on for longer. Honestly, I wish both those teams had more matches and stayed together for a bit more. And both felt like under the right environment or a couple string of matches, they could have won the title. And I, I think most of Duralde's teams, honestly, and it's why I always wanted him to get singles chances. But and when he finally got them, it was like I believe I believe his first match was it was what who was his first match, because I believe it was a very tough first match, and then he just wasn't able to pull it off.
I don't
I'm trying
remember
to
who Geraldo's first match was, but while you're looking at that, I'm going to mention
yeah.
another team that came into the Schmoedown as the first fans really to compete in the league, and that was late to the party. Robert and Vanessa, I appreciate the fact that
Oh,
they were even willing to do it. Who was it?
it was his first two matches were Brendan Meyer and the Barbarian, and those are his only singles
Those are
matches.
rough. Those are rough.
Not ideal,
Um,
not ideal.
not ideal. Not ideal. Uh, Robert and Vanessa from Late to the Party were always brought a fun vibe. You could tell they were having a great time being there, great time being part of the show. They were incredibly knowledgeable, and they showed that in both the Schmoedown and the First Class League. And I think that they don't get as much credit as they should for the the fun and the likability and the characters that they brought to the show.
Absolutely. I mean, they were the first fans to really come into the game. And I think like being the first fans, you get this underdog mentality, but you also kind of like they are the ones to open the door for other fans to come in and other fans to succeed. And you're always going to be like remembered fondly just for that reason, and just for being the trendsetters, the groundbreakers, if you will. And both of them had very memorable moments. I think one of their first match, or I think their first match was against Team Action, which by the way, if there's any team that can set you up as a babyface, is going against Team Action as your first match, because you're obviously
Yeah.
going to be a babyface against them.
Yeah.
And to watch them compete and it's just always a fun time. They're great at promos. They understand the game by being fans. And really, like, part of the reason why they're so beloved is the fact that they were the ones that opened the door for everyone else.
Absolutely. And let's round off our discussion here today with uh, the king of the sweaties, the late great John Schnepp, one of the most underappreciated baby faces of all time.
Absolutely. He was absolutely fantastic. He was always fun to watch. He was very knowledgeable, and it was tough to ever root against Schnepp, but to watch back on those matches and especially now is always bittersweet. And we're always, even though we know the results, you always root for him to win and pull out in the end, even though we know sometimes that wasn't the case.
Yeah. John Schnepp, one of my favorites from watching Collider, from tuning into the Schmoedown. Just a great guy, and we should have had more of him in the Schmoedown, and it's very sad that we unfortunately didn't get that. But he deserves a lot more credit, I think, for the short run in the Schmoedown that he had than he gets.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I believe that is the end of the list.
That's the end of
So
our list.
yes.
Who did we miss? Let us know in the comments below. I'm sure that somebody is watching this right now, screaming a name at the screen that we've forgotten about. There
Mhm.
were so many baby faces over the course of the Schmoedown that we couldn't fit them all into one episode, but these were just a few of the ones that we wanted to talk about. Uh, Josh, let people know where they can find you.
They can find me here. So go support LGR, subscribe, join our Patreon. There's a lot of great Patreon perks waiting for you there. Um, I'll be on the show for a bit, and then we'll see from there. But I'll also say, feel free to put in the comments. We do read the comments, and feel free to put in the comments what you want our next episodes to be. We do have a couple of episodes planned out for the future, but we are keeping note of what what you guys want to see as an episode, and we'll definitely be able at some point, if we like the idea, obviously. But if yeah, but just let us know what you want us to talk about. Definitely put those baby faces. Who did you truly love rooting for in the Schmoedown every match? So thank you so much. But yeah, the only place you can find me right now is here on LGR. So go support LGR.
Okay. And you can find me on Twitter at Adelia Chambo. I post there sometimes, not all the time, but mostly retweet a bunch of stuff about LGR.
Mhm.
So you can find us there. You can find LGR on Twitter at LGR_network. And join us on Patreon, patreon.com/LGR_network. $1 a month gets you into the Discord, and you can check out some other perks there, including being on a show. So if you want to be on this show to talk about Schmoedown with us, the Patreon is the way to do that. And we will be back next month with another Schmoedown retrospective topic. See you then.
It's for real.